The book is in. All right. Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Cheryl. Nice to be with you.
We are in Canberra. We're chatting with Robert Macklin. Now, Robert, would you call yourself a historian?
I would indeed, yes. In fact, I really feel that I'm at the forefront of a new wave of historians, particularly in Australia, where for the first time we're really starting to look at the real Australian history as opposed to the British history of Australia, which we've all been taught in our schools and universities. So for the first time we're really getting into the reality of what it was like in those early days of our colonisation.
Now, Robert is here today to chat with us about his new book, Hamilton Hume. He's the Australian explorer. But before we start talking about your new book, tell me, so what have you written in the past?
Well, I've written, as you said, I've written about 26 books. They range over a fair range of subjects, but mostly to do with Australia, Australian biography and Australian history, both in war and in peace.
Right. And why did you choose to write about Hamilton?
Well, actually, it came about because I took a holiday over at Norfolk Island a few years ago, and there it was a fairly boring sort of holiday because Norfolk Island there's not a lot to do.
Did you see Colleen McCulloch?
No, I didn't. No,
just checking.
But I was wandering around one day and I came across this museum. And it told me a great deal about the absolute horror of the history of that island. And as I researched it, I suddenly discovered really that I didn't know a great deal about our earliest colonial times. And I wrote a book then about the history of Norfolk Island, which is coming out in a new edition in December of this year, and it's called Dark Paradise. But with that background, I suddenly thought to myself, I've got to know a little bit more about our Australian history, and I touched upon Hamilton Hume in that research because his father Andrew Hume, had been there early in the piece as a superintendent of convicts. And it just so happened that my father-in-law had done some work on Hamilton Hume. He was an amateur historian. And so I used his early work together with my own research to start to do the biography of Hamilton. And I discovered that not only was he our greatest explorer, but his life, which went from 1797, where he was born in Parramatta, until 1873, covered those first 80 years of our history. So I was able to thread that life through until the broad story of our first 80 years as a colony.
Okay, I'm in Canberra and I'm talking to Robert Macklin, historian and writer. We're talking about the explorer, Hamilton Hume, and probably, would it be fair to say, a little known explorer?
Yes, little known in the sense that what we were taught in the schools was that basically the expedition of Hume and Hovell, down from who made that extraordinary expedition from Sydney down to Port Phillip. And that was in 1824-25, and at the time, it was regarded basically as a two-hander. You know, Hume and Hovell equally the leaders. But the truth is that about 3 times during the journey, Hovell, who was he was the Englishman, he was the English sea captain. Every time they came to a new river, like the Murrumbidgee or the Murray, he got faint-hearted and wanted to go home. And it was only because Hume pressed on that they were able to complete the expedition. In fact, on the third occasion that Hovell wanted to go home, he tried to rouse the convicts to mutiny. And that was only 2 days before they actually reached the southern coast. So the Hume and Hovell story is of itself a fascinating exercise because it was only, the strength and courage of Hume, and also, most importantly, the fact that he had grown up in Australia, in the bush, with Aboriginal friends who had taught him so much about how to survive in the bush, and he had a great respect for them. He called them my friends of the forest. And it is that element of our Aboriginal background that I also love to write into the story, and it is because it's such an essential part of those early times in our lives.
So would there be, we're talking about, quite a number of years ago now. So what does the modern day explorer look like?
Well, the modern day explorer is I think, has had his day. I mean, I think these days our exploration is done from space. These days, the kinds of terrible strains that those men had to go through is a thing of the past. Hume took not just Hovell, but 6 convicts all the way through absolutely uncharted territory down to what is now Melbourne and all the way back. And it was a completely horrific time for them. But he got them through. And whenever he came across Aboriginal people, where there was any kind of hostility, he had this marvellous capability of communicating with them. And if they were really hostile, what he used to do was just go straight forward to them and hand his rifle over to the most hostile of the Aboriginal people. And it just had this magnificent effect that suddenly he, with his language skills, Aboriginal language skills, and these gestures, he was able to do what other explorers were simply unable to do. In fact, he taught Sturt. He took Sturt out way through the western of New South Wales, where they discovered the Darling River. And it was Hamilton Hume, rather than Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson, who finally crossed the Blue Mountains and gave us the way into the west of New South Wales.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's extraordinary, the bravery. They're almost heroic in a way, aren't they?
They most certainly are.
They broke ground.
They did. And it was so important. That expedition down to Port Phillip and back, that changed the whole aspect of what Australia could be. Until then it was basically a penal colony. But what they uncovered were these amazing, wonderful rolling plains and lands, which there was room for 10,000 farms, for millions of farmers, and from that moment, Australia had a future as a country, as a nation.
And here we are now. Well, thank you so much for coming in to chat with us. I know that our readers will really want to read this book. It's called Hamilton Hume. It's by Robert Macklin, and Robert was here with us today. We're in Canberra. It's part of our series of Meet the Author in Canberra. Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thank you to the readers to have better reading.